Welcome back to A More Perfect Union, the Hill's 3-day virtual festival. We're on day 2, if you are counting, and we got another day of this left, but it's been awesome so far. I'm Steve Clemens. I'm editor-at-large of The Hill. Today's Focus segment will take a deep dive into the state of our economy with the current pressures brought on by the pandemic. Before we drive in, a reminder, you can tweet us at The Hill Events. It's at The Hill Events using the hashtag TheHillAMPU, The Hill, A More Perfect Union. We're broadcasting live and we'll take your questions throughout the program. And if you experience any trouble with the live stream, please don't hit your computer. Just refresh the page and I think it will work. Joining me for this session is The Hill's finance reporter, Sylvan Lane. Sylvan, it's great. First time together. I don't know if you're ready for it, but I mean, it's great to have you up here, and thank you for taking on some of these heavy conversations. Are you up for it?
Oh, I'm up for it. Thanks for having me, Steve.
Excellent. Well, we're going to have some fun today. Now, we're kicking off, I think...
Yeah, we're kicking off the
kick off.
Alrighty. Well, we are kicking off the conversation with Geeta Gopinath, the chief economist at the International Monetary Fund, and the first woman to have this role. Welcome.
Join you.
Thanks so much. Now, earlier this month, the IMF cut its forecast for global growth. Can you tell us about some of the main forces that are slowing the recovery from the pandemic?
So what we are seeing is a global recovery that, while it does continue, the momentum has slowed. And that was particularly true in the third quarter, but we're also seeing some of that follow into the fourth quarter. So that led to a downgrade of about 0.1 percentage point for global growth. But underlying that was most significant downgrade for the US, downgrades for Germany and for Japan. And this came from a combination of, firstly, Delta affecting people going back to certain kinds of contact-intensive activities, but also because of supply disruptions and the higher inflation that we're seeing in many countries.
Now, in the U.S., we've enjoyed a fairly quick bounce back from a lot of the damage we've taken during the pandemic, but I know that's not necessarily the case for poorer nations. Now, what more do nations like the United States need to do to help foster a more equitable recovery?
So indeed, we are seeing these very divergent speeds of recoveries, not just for the US, but I would say for most advanced economies. Our projection is for them to be back to pre-pandemic trends by the middle of next year or towards the end of next year. While for most emerging and developing countries, they have significant scarring going into the next few years. And one of the big reasons for that divergence is the inequitous access to vaccinations that remains the case, with low-income countries having less than 2% of their population fully vaccinated, while over 60% of advanced economies have full vaccination rates, are fully vaccinated. 60% of the population is fully vaccinated, and they are on to booster shots. So I would say that the foremost issue to address is solving this inequitous access, which requires delivering on the doses that they pledged that they would donate to COVAX and through that to low-income countries. Also for manufacturers to prioritize deliveries in the near term to COVAX and AVAT. And that can only happen if the countries that have surplus vaccines work together with the manufacturers.
Now, with these disparities in the recovery in mind, we also know that women have taken a much harder toll because of the pandemic-driven recession than men have. Can you explain a little bit about why that's the case?
So in the peak of the crisis last year, what we saw uniformly across the world is a bigger drop in female employment as compared to male employment. And one important reason was the fact that women tend to work in sectors that are, the hospitality area, retail industries, and so on. So that's where the concentration of hit to jobs were, and that's where women worked. And so that's where we saw an important fall. But a second important source of the difference was that women remained the primary caretakers at home. So when schools closed down, it was women who had to stay home to make sure that the children's education still continued, and any other kind of caregiving that needed to be provided fell disproportionately on women. And now only looking at the recovery, you do see recoveries coming back. You see women returning back to the labor force. But again, even in the US, we're seeing women's labor force participation come back slower than for men. And these hurdles remain, including in terms of making sure that daycares are open so that then women can return to work, making sure schools run on a regular basis. All of these issues are still holding back women's full return to the labor force.
And with that in mind, can you tell me about how the emergence of the Delta variant in June and July started to change the picture of the economic recovery?
So what we saw in June and July was the fact that cases started going up and dramatically in different parts of the world, though not all at the same time. So that, first of all, held back the recovery in the travel sector. Previously, we were seeing people traveling a lot more, but again, that dampened that recovery. Also, in terms of people returning to restaurants, that also we saw that slowing. At the same time, the Delta variant was also now creating significant waves in Asia, in East Asia, which are the manufacturing hubs of the world. That led to supply side disruptions, shipping delays. So again, these are the kinds of effects that we've seen disrupt economic activity in many parts of the world.
And speaking of those shipping delays, we've seen inflation, increase not only in the United States, but across the world. Can you talk to me a little bit about why this inflationary pressure has persisted a little bit longer than some economists have thought, and, when we might see it start to finally ease up a little bit?
Now, we expected to see, high inflation numbers because of the fact that there was a deep recession last year and prices have fallen for many goods, including for commodity prices. So some of that return in demand and in growth, the recovery in commodity prices just led to an increase in inflation. What we continue to see, of course, is this mismatch between supply and demand. So you had the deep recession last year. Now demand has bounced back. There's pent-up demand. There's also a considerable amount of policy support that was provided that held up household balance sheets and is leading to higher spending. But supply hasn't come back as strongly in multiple sectors. And of course, there are the semiconductor chips where, again, there's widespread shortages, and you're seeing that in car production and purchases. But you're also seeing that in delivery lags and shipping delays. So that's also feeding into the headline inflation numbers. We're again seeing energy prices going up. So as long as we have this friction that we're seeing between supply and demand, some of which we expect will resolve itself in the next few months, some will take longer, we are going to see elevated levels of inflation into the middle of next year.
And our last question, how soon do you think, the world might start to see in a global economy that resembles more what we saw before the pandemic? How long is it going to take to get to the other side of this, you think?
I'd say there's tremendous uncertainty around that, but we know what needs to be done. What needs to be done is to make sure that we get to widespread vaccinations around the world. We have vaccines, we have multiple successful vaccines, and now supply is strongly coming back up. So we need to make sure that we vaccinate the world fully, make sure that the antivirals, the new medications that are coming out are available more broadly, because then we can go back to some form of greater normalcy in individual lives and therefore in the world economy also.
Well, Geeta, thank you so much for taking some time today to talk about all of this with us. And thank you for helping us make a little bit more sense of this very confounding economy.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to join you.
Thank you. My next guest is Jay Timmons, the president and CEO of the National Association of Manufacturers. Jay, thanks for joining me.
Muted.
Jay, are you muted?
Man, you'd think after 20 months of this stuff, I'd figure out the mute button.
I just need to say, hey, Jay.
Monsieur le Chevalier, nice to see you.
Well, Jay, thanks for joining us and making do with our, pandemic restricted situation. But with that in mind, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the challenges facing manufacturers right now, given the supply chain snarls, backlogs, everything else we've seen. What do you think is the biggest challenge facing manufacturers at this moment?
I think it all comes in together, right? And it's frankly, I think the biggest cause of the supply chain backlog. if you will. And that is the fact that we simply don't have enough workers in the sector. We have 900,000 open jobs in manufacturing today. That number is going to grow to it's going to grow to over 2 million unfilled jobs, because we need to fill 4 million jobs by the end of this decade if we don't upskill and reskill our workforce to participate in the manufacturing economy. So that's what we're laser focused on right now.
So why do you think it is that manufacturers have had so much trouble filling these open jobs, especially considering how many jobs we lost at the outset of the pandemic?
So, it's not new. Before the pandemic, we had 500,000 open jobs. At the worst part of the pandemic, we only had 300,000 open jobs only. Today, again, it's 900,000. But, we're not the only sector that's fighting for talent. We're competing against other sectors. Now, I think the problem that has frankly vexed manufacturers for so many years, decades, in fact, is the fact that there is a perception problem about manufacturing jobs in this country. When you expose a young person to modern manufacturing and you show them the sleek, technology-driven jobs that are very rewarding and meaningful and life-changing and actually world-changing, they get pretty excited about it. We have a campaign right now that's called Creators Wanted. We're actually going into communities all across the country in a tractor trailer that opens to a triple wide. It's an escape room experience that allows young people, usually high school students, to kind of get a hands-on version or vision of what manufacturing is all about. And then after they come out, they see the jobs that are available in their community, and you can just see their eyes lighting up. But that's on us as manufacturers to make sure that young people understand what opportunities are available.
Now, with that in mind, how did the emergence of the Delta variant affect your ongoing campaign to get more folks involved in manufacturing?
Well, it certainly put our in-person experience on hold, as you might guess. But we did what everybody in the world is doing right now. We transitioned to a digital platform, and we were able actually, through our digital platform, to expose 6 million kids to modern manufacturing. When we go on the road and we do an in-person experience, we obviously can only tackle a few hundred at a time, or bring in a few hundred at a time. So that was a big change. But frankly, we turned a challenge into an opportunity to allow us to recruit and attract more young people. We have other issues that are going on as well, and they're related to public policy, and those include the thinking by some elected officials that we should undo the positive gains that we made in tax policy from 2017. Back in 2017, when tax reform was being debated, manufacturers made some very specific promises. We said if we got those tools that we had been looking for about 3 decades, we would invest more in America, we would create more American jobs, and we would raise wages and benefits for American workers. We did exactly that. We had record investment, record job creation, and record wage growth in 2018 and 2019 following those tax reforms. So we don't want to see us return to the archaic tax policies of the past or anything that would drive up the cost of doing business here in America. We want to create jobs right here at home.
And speaking of the public policy changes, obviously right now there's a great deal of discussion and negotiation going on over the dual-track infrastructure package. I wanted to get your thoughts on what provisions there might be the most helpful to manufacturers, especially when we're talking about the supply chain issues and employment issues that we've seen so far.
So let's start with the basics. Let's de-link those two bills, and let's take infrastructure. Infrastructure was passed in the Senate in a bipartisan manner. It needs to pass the House so that we can show not only Americans, but actually the entire world that American democracy works. I think after January 6th, I think a lot of folks are very concerned about what is the direction of democracy in the world? Are we still a beacon and a light to other societies throughout the globe? I say yes. I believe in America. I believe in the promise of America. I believe that manufacturing is the engine of a strong and vital American economy. But there are some doubters right now because of what we went through earlier this year. We need to show the world that we can work, that we can govern, and that we can actually come together. We've done that on infrastructure. Reconciliation is an entirely different story, and it goes right back to those revenue raisers, tax increases, punitive measures on manufacturers and other businesses of all sizes that would set us back. We had, as I said, record investment, job creation, and wage growth after tax reform. I don't know why anyone would want to return to the days where we weren't investing as much in America, or we weren't creating jobs here, or when we weren't raising wages and benefits. So I'm a big believer that we can get infrastructure done. I'm very optimistic about that. And I know that there are some very important spending proposals in reconciliation, and those should be debated separately, but they should not come at the expense of America's business to provide for a strong and vital economy for our country.
Now, shifting gears a little bit, President Biden and the administration announced a series of steps a few weeks ago to try to handle some of these supply chain issues that we've seen so far, including making sure ports are running 24/7, getting all the big package carriers on board with that. Have manufacturers noticed any sort of relief so far, either because of these provisions or anything else that's happened to try to loosen supply chains up a little bit?
This is something I've seen from the Biden administration that I greatly admire. They see what they can do through the government lens, and then they encourage business to deal with the parts that business should deal with. I would include vaccines in that as well. They encouraged right from the start, they encouraged businesses to pick up the mantle of leadership and ensure that workers got vaccinated. We're doing that in manufacturing as best we can. Here at the NAM, we have a vaccine mandate. We have 100% compliance. And we believe that all businesses should do that. And we appreciate the leadership of the Biden administration to get the world vaccinated and make our communities healthy and safe. On the supply chain issue, they kind of had the same model. They said, well, look, we can kind of deal with the port issue. So let's start with that. Now, business, you've got to step in and also do your part as well. We have a shortage, as I already mentioned, of workers in the sector where we can't make enough product to get it out the door. But if we did, and we see this all over the country, we don't have enough, for instance, truckers to be able to deliver the goods that we manufacture. So whether it's coming off of a ship in Long Beach, or it's coming from a facility here in the United States that is manufacturing a component product for another manufacturer to make a finished product, we have a shortage of folks in transportation and logistics. So I go right back to our responsibility as the business community to motivate and inspire Americans to come into our industries, and then to reskill and upskill those who are already here so that we can be productive. It's a challenge, there's no doubt, but I know we're up to the task. It's not going to be overnight. I had somebody actually write to me because I had the National Association of Manufacturers, and they said, only you can save Christmas. Well, that's kind of a big burden to put on a trade association executive, but it's true. Christmas is going to be difficult. We're going to have some difficulties getting products out the door and getting them into homes for the next several months. But I do believe this bottleneck will start to ease, and we'll start to see some more certainty in the supply chain in the future.
Well, Jay, thank you so much for joining us, and good luck playing Santa Claus this year.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Sylvan. That was great. Joining us now is Republican strategist and pollster Frank Luntz. He's here to give the Hill a sneak peek into his latest great rethink data. Frank, it's great to see you as always. Let me ask you this. I mean, my sense is, I used to write about globalization and, America. America was the place where trust abounded. We had sort of just-in-time production, just-in-time delivery, just-in-time jobs, just-in-time money. And all of a sudden, that seems to have had a big heart attack. And people aren't trusting the system, anything. Everything's slow. It kind of feels like the old Soviet Union. Can you tell us why?
Well, the world doesn't feel that way. We did a study with the organization called Premise, and we polled 60,000 people across the globe. And they're much more optimistic about America's capability, about America's ability to lead, about America's ability to get things done. Whereas we in America are much more negative. And I think it's partially because we've been disappointed with our economy. We've been disappointed with our democracy. And the economic component of it, I think it's because the stock market continues to do so well, and yet other areas of the economy just don't seem to be performing. And the American people do not use the stock market, unlike our former president. The American people do not justify or do not evaluate the economy based on the stock market. They evaluate it based on how much money they have in their pockets. And as they look forward, they're wondering whether prices are going to continue to go up because they already see inflation, and they wonder whether their tax bill is going to go up because, frankly, they can't afford it. So there is that negativity or the pessimism that next year is not going to be as good as this year.
You know, I know you've been talking to people in your famous focus groups about technology and whether, you know, what the levels of trust are there one way or another. And, you know, technology is a big tent, right? You know, it can be everything from, you know, what's coming in the future of 5G and communications to, you know, their daily interaction with Facebook or Twitter or, you know, running anything, you know, et cetera. But I'd just be interested in the insights that you have on how Americans are looking at technology now.
Well, here's what's fascinating, because it really is how you frame the issue. And I'm not here to get involved in a legislative discussion, but if you ask the American people, has technology made your life better? A whole lot of Americans say no. If you ask the public, has technology made your life easier? Almost everyone says yes. So how that debate is framed over the coming weeks and months is going to determine what the public's reaction is to what's happening in Washington. Now, make no mistake, the public is demanding some sort of action, but they are not asking to break up these companies. They're not asking to to do something anti-monopolistic. They're not asking for regulations, but they do see that there's a problem. And in fact, I would say, because I know you have a lot of opinion leaders, opinion makers on this Zoom conference, if Washington ends up without doing anything between now and Election Day, there are going to be a lot of parents who are going to punish them because they really are scared of the impact of technology on their kids. They appreciate it for themselves, but they're afraid of it for the next generation.
You know, Frank, another thing that interests me right now is we see, I don't know what to call them, lots of political bubbles. You know, we talked to Joe Manchin yesterday, you know, in sort of this centrist, I was with Brian Fitzpatrick, a Republican congressman, there's sort of a centrist pragmatic bubble. There's this sort of fervent progressivism bubble, you know, Representative Jayapal, others that we're having in this forum as well there. We have a kind of libertarian crowd, and we have other, you know, conservatives. You know, I had John Bolton on. We'll have John Bolton as well, who's looking at national security, but broadly a kind of strong conservatism. I'm just interested in others. I mean, frankly, there's a wide fabric of perspective and concern in this country. And I'm just wondering where the equilibrium points are anymore, or does everybody just go for it with it wherever they are without regard to the broader equation? I don't know if I'm communicating this right, but you know, I'd just love to get your sense of where those equilibrium moments are, or are we in just a winner takes all, you know, fight to the death among these groups?
It's the reason why I left the country, and your viewers will not realize that I have not been in America for most of the last 6 months. I couldn't, because these bubbles don't allow for other opinions to permeate. That we are now convinced that we're right and they're wrong, and it's always us and them. We're now convinced that the people who are wrong are dedicated to undermining and destroying the country. We are so harsh and so negative, and it's not just a matter of distrust. We think that those on the other side are actively trying to destroy the country. And the language that politicians use towards each other on both sides is horrific. This is language that you would not tolerate your child bringing into the house if they were 14 or 15 years old, and yet politicians talk to each other and talk to the American people that way. This is a problem. I've been traveling the globe. I've been in 11 different countries over the last 6 months, and they look at the American democracy as being hopelessly broken. And frankly, they're wondering whether we're that shining city on a hill that Ronald Reagan spoke about. So when you ask this question about equilibrium, we really don't have it right now, and I'm afraid of the consequences. Most people watching this are trying to get an edge. They're trying to figure out what will happen with legislation. They're trying to figure out where to make investments. They're looking for that informational advantage. I'm desperately trying to find this common ground, these threads that unite us, that will bring AOC and Joe Manchin into the same room with Mitch McConnell and Susan Collins. And I don't see it. And that is frightening to me, because thanks to social media and to the type of life we live right now, if we don't find that commonality, we will surely find the differences. We will exploit them, as we have been, and we'll become an even more divided society as we move forward.
Let me ask you another question. I don't know how to frame either. You're the framing expert, and I'm just sort of winging this. But it seems to me that what brings together different people sometimes is a sense of crisis, that an existential conflict, big wars, big challenges or assaults on the nation. 9/11 brought people together, and interestingly, COVID didn't bring people together, and now, you know, when we're basically a few days away from the next climate change conference, and you know, we can all feel and see the impacts of changes in climate that are happening, and what may happen. I'm just wondering, what is your focus groups, what does your polling show, and your sense of things show about attitudes towards climate? And again, we're talking in this segment about the economy. Climate is the economy also, in terms of how we do this. So what are your insights there, Frank?
So again, I go back to that premise study of 60,000 people globally. They think that America offers the best ladders to success. They think that economically, America still offers people the chance to rise up. If you were born poor, you can end up in middle class. If you were born middle class, you can end up wealthier. They believe in us more than we believe in ourselves. But I need to compare our findings with what we get in the UK. Right now, the UK, climate is not a partisan issue at all. COVID is not a partisan issue at all. Science, technology, they are not partisan issues. People have a consensus. Only in America are we so hopelessly divided that we can't even agree on a vaccine that we invented, that we manufactured. You'd think that we'd be celebrating it. You'd think we'd be proud of it. And instead we condemn it, or too many Americans condemn it. And now with climate, it's going to require the president to use every aspect of his unifying communication, which we haven't seen that much of, to get the American people on board. And it's pretty hard to ask the rest of the globe to sacrifice, to ask the rest of the globe to make these commitments that COP26 is about, if America itself aren't willing to make those commitments. I know I sound pessimistic about a lot of this. It's because I am. It's because this is who I listen to, this is who I poll, this is who I focus group, and we are a pretty angry, divided, just foul country right now, and it affects my own thinking.
In 2016, I've talked with you this before. I had the opportunity to interview then Vice President Joe Manchin, you know, on how he saw the election building with Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump then. And he said, Steve, the Democratic Party has a problem. He said, we're a party of snobs. The Democratic Party is a party of snobs. And it was an on-the-record comment. I used it. I published it in The Atlantic. I'm just interested. I've talked to people in the White House and said, have you de-snobbed the party enough? And they said, we're working on it, but we're not there. I'd just be interested. You're a pollster. You're an advisor primarily to the Republican side of the equation. But if you had an opportunity to give President Joe Biden an opportunity to help him with what he sort of saw as a structural problem in the Democratic Party, what would be on some of the things he might think about?
First off is that Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema are the perfect examples of Democrats, proud Democrats, not conservative Democrats, just Democrats who think that they're going too far. Listen to them. Second is that people, hell hath no fury like a taxpayer scorn. If this spending is going to increase taxes among working Americans, they're going to be mad as hell. Third is to be thankful that the Republicans are so disorganized, because right now, if I was advising them, I'd be telling them to focus on the spending efforts on these various programs that the public doesn't want, doesn't need, and you can't prove that it's efficient, effective, and accountable. Right now, the president is very lucky that the Republicans are focused on on culture wars, are focused on more social issues, because the moment they turn to economics, you're going to see a lot of Democrats very angry that Joe Biden ran as a centrist and he's governing as Bernie Sanders.
Well, Frank Luntz, world-renowned pollster and strategist and advisor to so many. Just real quick, when are you going to be back?
You know what? I was supposed to come back this week, and I didn't come. I was boarding up. I was literally getting the Uber to go to LAX to fly back to the U.S. I've been to fly back to Washington, and I'm going back to the UK. I'm going back to teach in Edinburgh, teach in Rome, teach in Saudi Arabia. I'd rather be teaching global students who actually want to learn than trying to teach Americans who think that they know everything. I know I've been humbled over the last couple of years by what I've learned about democracy and the economy, and I wish that the American people would prioritize humility and not pride. I think we'd be a stronger country for it.
Well, Frank Luntz, I want to just say, I mean, we've been friends for a long time. I always appreciate your time and insights. And when you do come back here, we'd love to have you here in person. And thank you so much for your candor.
Thank you. You got it. I appreciate it.
My next guest is Liz Schuler, the new president of the Afl-Cio. She is the first female who has ever run the Afl-Cio. It's amazing. It's going to be terrific. I had a chance to speak with Liz a short while ago about the role of unions in the current labor environment, and that's also very much about the future of our economy in our more perfect union. So, Liz Schuler.
Liz, it's so great you're with us today, and I really am so excited to talk to you because I have known a long line of white male presidents of the Afl-Cio. And I think it's just a historic inflection point, just to be honest, talking about glass ceilings, this was a huge one. So just tell us how that feels, and how is your membership embracing or not the question of we now have this great female leader of the most important union in the United States of America?
Wow. Well, first of all, thank you, Steve. You're a great partner, and we are so grateful to The Hill for the work that you do as journalists. And you're right, the labor movement, this is a different labor movement, and we're building for the future. And we are in a moment where workers are rising up. And I don't think many people realize that the labor movement is actually 6.5 million women. And it's the largest women's organization in the country. So I'm very proud to be, as a woman leader, stepping into a leadership role in this moment where women are really on the rise in the workforce, in the workplace. And I think it is a unique time for the labor movement, especially seeing what's happening out there in the economy.
Thank you for that. Look, we're sort of in this interesting moment right now in this country after nearly 2 years of the COVID pandemic, and we're not through it. We're beginning to see life come back in many ways, but there's still a challenge. But what we've seen as the economy comes back online is that labor has the leverage, that people have leverage in this time when there's a perceived shortage of workers. And I know you've commented specifically on that framing. I want to give you an opportunity to share with our audience your perspective. But it does seem, that I think that this is a unique moment where people are thinking about quality of life, what they're earning and paying, what they're giving up. And I'm just interested, where do you think this is going to go so that we don't end up back in a system where labor is essentially neglected again and taken for granted?
You're right about the pandemic. Working people have been sacrificing, especially those frontline workers who showed up every day and kept this country moving through a crisis, whether it was bus drivers, continuing to get people to their jobs, our healthcare workers who, if you remember at the beginning of the pandemic, weren't even getting the proper safety equipment and personal protective equipment, PPE, wearing garbage bags to the hospitals. So they have actually been the ones who have sacrificed, who have persevered, and now finally are being seen. And the term essential is, I think, reflective of the fact that now people are seeing what it takes to make this country hum. But now the essential workers are being treated as expendable. And that's why we're seeing the activity we're seeing now with so many workers rising up and going on strike. We have nearly 100,000 workers who have either authorized a strike or are on strike right now, 30 different strikes happening. And that's because it's companies talking out of both sides of their mouth, right? It's, we need you, you're essential, but at the same time, oh, wait a second, you're coming back through, the pandemic, we're getting things back up to speed. And, actually, we don't necessarily need you like we thought we did, because we're going to pay you less. We're going to actually cut your healthcare benefits. And workers are not being seen and treated with respect, having gone through what we've gone through. And so I think that's really what is happening out there right now, is working people are waking up saying either I'm not being, recognized and appreciated, or, you know what, I don't want to go back to a crappy job and risk my health and get paid peanuts. I think that it's time for us to actually rise up and demand more.
Liz, one of the question I have is about President Biden. And you've said that President Biden is the most pro-union president in American history, which is a big, it's a big compliment to him and whatnot. But we also know that unions as a share of the U.S. workforce have been declining over time. I'm interested in how you, under your leadership, are going to try and turn that trend around, and what the president. We had Ron Klain help open this whole forum on a more perfect union. The White House Chief of Staff made similar kind. But what structurally do you think is possible to do to turn that shrinking percentage of union representation around in America?
President Biden and Vice President Harris have been the most pro-union, because they use the word union every single day, and no matter who the audience is. And I think that's a true testament to the values that they share with the labor movement, that working people be at the center of decision making. And we've seen that in the policy work. We've seen it in the legislation that has been debated on Capitol Hill right now, that the investments we make as a country have to create good union jobs. And we hear that over and over again, that we as taxpayers who are footing the bill want a return on our investment, that this is going to actually lift everyone up. Inequality is at the highest we've seen it, where you have the 1% doing really well, and then the rest of us, the 99%, who are continuing to struggle. You talk to people on those picket lines out there right now. Most people are still not seeing the increases in their pay. They're being asked to make more sacrifices, despite the fact that companies continue to do very well and profitability is back. And CEOs certainly are, making almost 300 times the average worker. So there's something out of whack there, something out of balance, and this administration sees that. And so we've been working very collaboratively to make sure that the investments the country makes, the policy choices, the guardrails that we want to make sure are established, so that working people see the benefits of what their government is capable of.
Liz, what are some of your red lines in the Build Back Better Act to kind of look and think about the infrastructure? It's tied to the infrastructure bill, but the human infrastructure that's tied to that, that's tied around the social contract for American citizens and how they engage with work. I've talked with the Chamber of Commerce a bit about their concerns that we still create a pro-growth environment that's that's growing in America, can lead to good jobs. But I'm just interested from the workers' perspective, what are you hoping to see remains part of the Build Back Better Act?
The labor movement has been advocating for both the infrastructure investments and Build Back Better for months. And it really is the change that we voted for in the 2020 election. So we care deeply about those investments, and whether you're talking about the clean energy economy that's going to unleash incredible opportunities for job growth, or the care economy, which also we know the system of care in this country is broken, and we've seen that through the pandemic. But we know that most people can't go back to work until the care infrastructure is built in a way that supports families and also makes the care jobs good jobs. And so that's what we're seeing in Build Back Better, is a prioritization of that investment. And so we would love to see the biggest, boldest plan possible. And we are advocating for that every day as negotiations continue, and including the PRO Act, which you may remember, labor law enforcement. I meant to say when we talked previously that mostly unions have been, slowly shrinking because it is nearly impossible to form a union in this country without fear and discrimination and harassment, firing. So that until we fix our labor laws, which we have some provisions, in Build Back Better, that it really is next to impossible for workers to do that without great risk and great cost. And that is wrong, to have all this power in the hands of corporations, when in reality, the law of the land is to protect workers who want a voice on the job. So we need to enable more people to form unions. And in fact, you've probably seen the public numbers that have come out recently suggest that 68% of the public supports unions, 77% of young people, and 60 million people would join a union if they could tomorrow. So the environment is absolutely right for us to be coming together collectively to demand more as workers, and to balance those scales that I talked about earlier so that we can shrink that inequality gap in our economy.
It's very interesting when you kind of think about unions and where they are and aren't. And again, I'm maybe woefully underinformed here, and so I'll look forward to you to educate me. But I kind of look at, like, my industry, media is one where there wasn't a lot of unions, but guess what? They're beginning to organize. I'm beginning to hear and see more union organizing movements within media companies. That's one area. Another area is the tech sector. And I'm just interested in your snapshot of what the realities are in the tech sector. Is there, when we see these revelations of within Facebook and, real worker angst and discontent, I'm just wondering, is that a precursor of something very different? And then the third, and I hate to kind of glob this in, but just sort of geographically the South. And I'm just interested in what you see happening, on those fronts, and what am I missing in my map?
Well, this is the moment, and we see unlimited potential for workers to be joining unions, especially in areas of the economy that are growing, that haven't traditionally had a union footprint, and emerging sectors coming out of the pandemic that as we all come back to work and try to figure out how work is evolving and changing, and workers really want to have a seat at that table. They want to have a voice in how their workplaces function and the decisions that are made. And I think most people who work, no matter if you're a journalist or if you're out, on a wind turbine in the middle of the ocean, you want to have a say in making sure that there are workplace rules and guidelines and safety protections that will benefit you. And that's what unions do, is people coming together to leverage their collective strength to have a voice. And you mentioned digital journalists, journalists in newsrooms all across this country are organizing because they see what's happened to the industry. They see that, corporations are now looking at the bottom line instead of protecting their workers or making sure that, you're getting a fair return on your work. And I've even seen journalists use the collective bargaining process, the negotiating process at the table for things even outside of wages and working conditions, things like your carbon footprint. How can the company actually be held more responsible for its corporate practices? So I think that's this new generation coming in. It's a new way of looking at unions on how we can actually leverage into different spaces. And it's up to us in the labor movement to reflect the needs of the modern workforce. And we're hard at work, busy thinking about creative strategies to meet workers where they are. Think about how do we, as the labor movement, meet the future needs of workers as, the future of work is upon us. As you mentioned, technology changing our work. We want to make sure technology is working for working people, not just landing on us, disrupting our work and showing us the door. So we have the ability to do that as a society, as a country, to make those decisions that working people should be co-creating, co-designing, be at the forefront of the innovation process.
Well, let's just take it one notch further. And yeah, I know we're getting close to wrapping this up, but it's such a interesting framing. And I guess one of my friendly criticisms of the AFL and the labor movement in general is I felt it wasn't keeping up with the dynamics of the modern workforce, the complexity. And you just sort of felt like, yeah, it's great to weigh in on trade deals where you're trading steel and, chicken parts or something, but the complexities of labor are not all wrapped up in trade deals with other countries, that there are many other dimensions, particularly in a knowledge economy, particularly when a gig economy has become part of it. And I'm just wondering if the labor union world recognizes that it was slow on that, and what you're doing to try to ramp that up, of thinking about the modern realities of work and what we're doing. Because I'd love to just take a notch further what you just shared, because I think it's so important.
And you're right. We haven't been as nimble, perhaps, as we should be when it comes to talking about technology and not being just reactive, but looking around the corner at what we can be doing to flex our muscle in these spaces. And you spoke about trade. Yes, tariffs are important, but so is digital trade and the use of artificial intelligence and how we are seeing trade take place in these new arenas. We need to be fluent and proactive, from everything, from quantum internet to advanced manufacturing and everything in between. And we need to make sure those technologies are human-centered. And so that's exactly why we established the Afl-Cio Technology Institute. This is sort of the place where innovation happens within the labor movement. We're just getting started to make sure that we're coming up with the game-changing ideas and proposals that workers should be thinking about, and what tables should we be at, and how can we make endless frontiers legislation. We see that through a worker perspective. Which hasn't really been done before, and that's been to some degree our fault, but also that workers haven't been seen in these future of work conversations. And we're talking about the future of work and workers, and we should absolutely be thinking about that through a worker lens.
Real quick, hashtag strike wave. What is it?
Striketober. Maybe it'll be Strike-ember soon. I don't know. We're hoping that we can, obviously it's the best thing to get workers back to work, but with a fair deal. And that's what, these strikes are all about, is being seen, appreciated, respected, and protected and paid. And so that's where we're seeing 10,000 John Deere workers on the line right now. We have, workers at Kaiser who are actually, contemplating a strike in healthcare of all industries, where workers should be taken care of who have sacrificed through this pandemic. But instead, they're looking at two-tier wage systems and changes to their healthcare. So I think we're going to be seeing more of this if companies don't wake up and actually, get the memo on treating your workers well, investing in them as an asset instead of looking at them purely as a cost. And that's what the future of this economy will be all about.
Well, to our audience, with hashtag strike wave, it's something I've been reading in Liz Schuler's tweets. Today, we're talking about what it takes to construct a more perfect union. And part of that is labor. Part of it is what we want in terms of a healthier, more successful, dynamic nation. And Liz Schuler, the brand new president of the Afl-Cio, so grateful you could spend some time with us today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Steve.
My last guest on this segment is Gene Sperling. He's a senior advisor to the president. He's a coordinator of the American Rescue Plan and a former director of the National Economic Council. Everybody serious in economics knows Gene Sperling. Gene, it's great to be with you today. We've had a phenomenal line of conversations, and I guess when I've been thinking about them and knew we were going to get a chance to spend some time together, I was asking myself, if we were doing this 1 year ago, right? 1 year ago, before President Biden had come in, we had COVID hitting the economy, and we had not had the American Rescue Plan in place. We had not done this. I just wonder what your mood would have been, what my mood would have been. Now with the American Rescue Plan, which you've helped usher forward and deploy resources, where is this country, say, compared to a year ago?
Well, I think it's just a dramatic difference. And I think what's really important to understand about the American Rescue Plan was that it was designed to be both a bold boost to jumpstart the economy, but it was also, Steve, about lessons learned too, about making sure that the funds would be there for long enough to not make the mistake of the American Recovery Plan under President Obama, where it helped us get out of recession fast, but wasn't strong or long enough to make sure the recovery was as strong as needed and that it could overcome the bumps in the road. Now, when you look at the Jumpstart, I mean, think about it. We were creating 60,000 jobs a month. It's been 600,000 a month since the American Rescue Plan. We were losing 175,000 hospitality jobs a month when President Biden came in. Now you've created 2.2 million. We're at 4.8% unemployment 18 months faster. That is because there was so much in there that was about helping to jumpstart the economy, combined with the effort to spread vaccines and help deal with COVID. But I also think it's important to note that when you look at this 1.9 trillion, when you look at things like the state and local plan, you know, they cut for every city, they come in 2 tranches. They can be used over 4 years. And what that means is, I think, again, on lessons learned, you got to have enough funds and flexibility there to help mayors and governors deal with the bumps in the road. 23 of the 26 first months of recovery after the Great Recession, you actually saw state and local governments contracting from the U.S. economy, taking about 0.5 point of growth a year. Now people have the funds and the flexibility where if they needed the money for crisis, it was there. But if they want to have it there, you know, seeing that things like higher gas prices or the Delta variant can happen, and surely things will happen in 2022. These funds are strong enough and long enough that it can help us have not just the quick jumpstart, but ensuring that this is a durable and equitable recovery.
Gene, I want our audience to understand something because, you know, I want to call these distractions because they're big priorities of your White House, you know, the infrastructure bill, the reconciliation bill. But, you know, the pandemic's not over and the American Rescue Plan is still operating. I mean, there's still elements out there, but we almost, I mean, I got to just blame us in the media. We don't talk about it that way. And just so I'm interested in our audience getting kind of a clearer picture from your perspective of what are the vital ongoing dimensions of the American Rescue Plan that are here and present now.
Sure. Well, obviously, I mentioned the state and local plan. That's $350 billion, you know, compared to the $140 billion in the recovery plan. That is out. You know, what's interesting there is that, you know, I was just talking to the governor of Hawaii yesterday. He is one of the many governors and mayors who said before a dime of the American Recovery Plan had gone out, they suspended layoffs they'd been planning. Just simply knowing the funds were coming their way has allowed many of the states to accelerate even other spending, knowing that's going to be there. So that money comes out for most states and all cities in 2 tranches. So all of the efforts that you might see that people are doing to universal broadband, to housing, to dealing with some of their financial struggles, to dealing with some of the hardships created by COVID, both health and economic wise, those are still being funded at state, local levels. And much of the rescue efforts you hear at state and city levels are happening because of the American Rescue Plan. Second, you know, we're seeing, well, one of the great challenges has been standing up the emergency rental assistance. Our country has never before this year had a national policy to try to have a more humane eviction policy to prevent unnecessary evictions. That's been one of our most challenging because we were asked, or the state and local governments were asked to stand up something new. And we have always said this is not going fast enough or well enough to satisfy us. But over 500,000 family households, rental households, received payments that paid off all of their back arrears and have helped prevent so far the type of surge in eviction policy. But that funding will go on for 3 or 4 years and gives us an ability to try to have long-term reform in eviction policy. And then, of course, I have to mention the child tax credit. The child tax credit that people are receiving right now is historic. And I will also say that it has been really an example of what Joe Biden has wanted from us, which is to implement well in a way that's clear and simple and perceivable by working families. So think about it. This was the first monthly tax credit. It was passed in March. In 4 months, over 60 million children are getting it automatically. 4 months, it is monthly for the first time. In 4 months, it is being on the same day, the 15th of every month. 90% of people get it in direct deposit. 27 million low-income kids get the full benefit for the first time. So that people, just got their third, people are still going to get another payment in November 15th and December 15th, and then they'll get that second half when they file for their taxes. So that is something historic, something that the president is fighting for and fighting to continue in the Building Back Better plan. So yes, I do think that, everybody, in particular the media, often are victim to, of course, wanting to follow, the latest negotiation. But there is so much that is life-changing, from child care to the state local relief to the child tax credit to rental assistance, that is happening in the American Recovery Plan. And yes, it may not be as exciting once it's passed, but this is a president who believes the work is not done until those dollars are reaching people in a way that is helping their life, helping provide them true economic dignity and security. And that's really, what I wake up every day and try to do.
Well, Gene, I know you can't do what I'm about to ask you to do, which is to take off your White House hat, put on your Economist hat, because it's always fun, and I would learn so much from you. When you got 4.8% unemployment, and you've done as much in the economy to kind of get through this point, but actually kind of rewire the social contract on some of these things so that the system can keep breathing. And as we discuss these other big bills, I was with Senator Manchin for dinner Monday night, and he kind of shocked the room, and he said, guess what? How much we spent on World War II and how much on the Marshall Plan? Put them both together under current dollars. The couple of bills circulating are more than what we paid for World War II and whatever. Now, I don't know if that's an unfair comparison, but it does raise this question. If you're at 4.8% employment with folks worried about inflation, is there a point that, from an economic perspective, we've done too well? We're winning too much in terms of the support and bringing people on. What's the blind spot in my thinking on that?
I think it goes back to what I said initially, which is that if you look at the American Rescue Plan, it was bold enough to help jumpstart us, to get the economy back to life, of course, together with the efforts to reduce COVID. But as I said, it is not right to think about that this was just $1.9 trillion, dumped out on the economy, whether it needed or not. There were things that got out quickly, as they should, like the economic impact payments and the restaurant programs, things to save small business. These things did give a boost to the economy. But we also see the economy and recoveries have bumps that happen along the way. And so, I think that the more correct historical analogy is the American Rescue, is the effort after the Great Recession, where we saw that you need to ensure that demand stays strong, that you have, in a sense, an insurance policy. Steve, you remember in 2011, when I became National Economic Advisor, everybody thought 2011 was going to be an easy year. Well, what happened? You had gas prices go up with the Arab Spring. Then you had a global supply shock when you had the meltdown in Japan, and then we had the debt crisis, and it ended up being a year of under 2% growth. So I think when you look at this, it is much more spread out, much more designed to be both a boost to a strong economy, but also to ensure those funds are there as an insurance policy and will be helpful for a durable and equitable recovery. And when it comes to the Build Back Better programs, I think if you look at everything in there, one, these are often long-term agendas. And I'd say a couple things. One, they are about, one of the things I love about President Biden is like me, he or me like him, think that, giving people economic dignity, ensuring that they have a degree of security and opportunity in their lives in all situations is the right thing to do. But it also is part of increasing the productive capacity of our country, to allow more parents to choose to work or not have to choose between caregiving or work, but to be able to do both, to have the infrastructure investments, the climate investments that allow us to grow, to be more productive. So what I see is a plan that jump-started the economy with the American Rescue Plan, but also ensured that over these next 2 or 3 years, there's the flexibility to deal with unexpected challenges and have a strong recovery. And then long-term investments that are actually going to be about increasing our capacity, increasing our productive capacity from the capacity of people to work when they have family obligations, to having more skills to meet new jobs and to increase their level of productivity. And then the infrastructure investments that, as we see right now, will help us avoid supply shocks and allow us to have greater growth without having inflationary pressures. So I whether I have this hat on or I was talking off the record and not in this job, I would believe very strongly that this combination of the American Rescue Plan and the Build Back Better strategy is the exact right strategy for jumpstarting the economy, having a strong, durable recovery in the first 2 or 3 years like we struggled to have after the Great Recession, and then making those long-term investments, which are about productivity and growth, but are also about meeting what I think, and I know the president thinks is the fundamental goal of economic policy, which is to ensure that people who work can care for their families with dignity, that they can pursue their potential, and that they can work with respect and dignity in the jobs that they do take on for that potential and to care for their families.
Gene, I got to sneak in one more question. I'm just sort of, continually haunted, the fact that we've just come through this period of COVID. We had the George Floyd murder and other murders, racial-driven murders in this country. And I know you see a lot of data, and I'm just interested because the president does care about this. You do care about the divides in this country. Whether or not we are at a point as a recovery comes back that the racial divide and opportunity is beginning to shift to a narrowing rather than to a widening. I think it's one of the questions about equity that I know your administration is struggling with. I guess my unfair question to you is, do you see any progress?
Well, you were just talking to Liz Schuler. Look, people, you hear people talking about downsides of too tight of a labor market. Well, what she was talking about was the increased worker, power, worker leverage. Tighter labor markets have tended to be very important. This was something Jared Bernstein, before he joined the administration, wrote constantly. The tighter labor markets were very important for raising the wages, not only of workers overall, but African American, Hispanic workers. So I do think this kind of stronger workforce. There's times in a crisis that you also have to make sure things don't get worse. Part of our problems has been that when you've had deep recessions, that it is often people of color, or as we've had a pandemic, who have suffered more. So going all out for a recovery, going all out to, address COVID, going all out to get more people healthcare as is proposed in the Build Back Better plan. All of these things are good for the country as a whole, but all of them have, I think, a particularly positive impact in ensuring that workers who've been too often not cut in, not getting the fair deal they should, which are often minority workers, are those who just have not had the opportunities that many of us have been blessed to, do have more chances to work, more chances to rise, and also are less prone to see their lives disrupted by these falls that for people who don't have the cushion. Look, if you're an upper middle class or middle class person, you go through a hard time, you often have somebody in your family you can lean on. You're going to go through some difficult times, but you may not face that downward cycle. For people who say, well, maybe President Biden did too much to try to call a halt to this, hurting economy, too much to get the job market going, they're certainly not thinking about the people who never had a cushion, who in too many recessions are the ones who don't just suffer for a few months, but get into downward cycles. Just give you one statistic that doesn't get a lot of attention. The last 3 months have seen the greatest drop in long-term employment that we've ever seen in a 3-month period since we started keeping records in 1948. Why do I say that? Because short-term unemployment hurts, but people get over it. Long-term unemployment, you lose your house, you lose your health, you can lose your spouse, you can never recover. Having a recovery that gets more people back on their feet faster is very important to the equity goals that you're mentioning.
Gene Sperling, I just always love having conversations with you, and I think today when we're thinking big thoughts and having lots of different voices on what it takes to look forward on a more perfect union, you always have really enlightening things to add to that conversation. Gene Sperling is a senior advisor to President Biden. He's the coordinator for the American Rescue Plan. Really appreciate your time, Gene. Thanks so much for joining us.
Steve, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
And that brings us to the end of today's Focus segment. A big thank you to our sponsors, Microsoft and Southern Company, and to all of you watching at home. We're going to be back at 4 p.m. for Reveal, our third segment today, where we're going to be joined by Sal Khan, founder of the Khan Academy, the new National Youth Poet Laureate, and the Mayor of Atlanta. See you shortly.